All right, so now if you remember where we had to put in that crazy 9-digit API key, and go, where's that at? Right, we can't stream anything unless we know that. So if you go to API keys, once you've logged in, right, you've got a write API key and you've got a read API key. So if we go back to our MakeCode, notice it says, what's your write API key? This is the API key that you're going to use to write data to your specific channel. Okay, so if I go back to ThingSpeak, right, my write API key for this channel is the ZUCB. Right, it's very long, so you just highlight it and you're going to copy it. And what you're going to do in MakeCode is you're going to paste it. So each of your channels will end up with this API key, and you want to make sure that you've got the right API key for the right channel, or else what's going to happen is you're going to be sending data to your wrong channels, right? And we don't want that to happen. Okay, so for the most part, if you only have one greenhouse, you're only going to have one API key. But if you've got multiple channels, right, you're going to have multiple APIs keys. All right, so now I've got my right API key. It's all good, right? I've got checked my Wi-Fi password, username, everything's good. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to download this program just like we always do to your microbit, and then we are going to begin to see if we can populate our data. So let's download the program and go back to ThingSpeak. All right, so here we are back in ThingSpeak. I've got my data coming in, right, streaming from my internet. And so I've got my air temperature, I've got the time, right? Notice I managed to change this air temperature from Thanos' retirement greenhouse. What we can do to do that is you just click on this little pencil icon and you can change the title of the graph. And so I'm just going to say this is relative humidity, and my y-axis is going to be time, and my x-axis is going to be humidity. And I can change other things in here. I can change how often I want data to show up. I can decide if I want to round the data, stuff like that. I can decide what my data min, data max is. I can also change my y-axis, minimum to maximum, right? So for humidity, right, it's going to always be somewhere between 0 and 100, right? So when I change that, notice my y-axis changes. So if you're in a spot where your relative humidity isn't going to change very much, and you want it to, say, have your graph to be a little bit more flexible in what you can see or easier to see, I'm going to change this to say probably in my house my humidity is probably will drop down to 30%, and it's probably not going to get over 80. Right? So notice my time graph gets a little bit easier. Now, if you do not do that and you leave this blank, what it's going to do is it's going to be bounded by the data. Right? So I've got a little bit of fluctuation in here, but look at the fluctuation. It goes from 59 to 61. Right? So sometimes having graphs on this scale can mislead you into thinking that you've got a lot of data going up and down. So that's why I do like putting in slight scales in my y-axis to just make sure my humidity isn't going up and down a lot, right? But if you wanted to do a fine detailed analysis, then you can change the y-axis and you can see that fluctuation. I'm going to do the same thing over here with air temperature and time. All right, so I'm going to change out the data min, and I'm going to say usually my greenhouse should be over 40 degrees. And it's probably not going to get over 100. Let's say 105, just to be safe. All right, oops. So let's say 40 and 105. There we are. Everything else is the same. Boom. All right. So notice my temperature is being pretty stable, which, it probably will be. You'll see fluctuations on the course of a day, right? Or if you've got your greenhouse in the sun, right, and the sun comes and goes, right, you'll see fluctuations like that. Now, down here is my light lux value is field 3, so let's change that, lux value. And I'm going to put in my x-axis, I'm going to say light intensity, just as a reminder to me that lux is light intensity. My y-axis again is time. Okay, and this one will take a little bit of playing around with on your minimum axes, right? So if I say maybe 500 is my min and maybe 6,000 is my max, right? And so depending on where you have your greenhouse, right, you'll be able to change those numbers, right? And notice if you make it too orange, right, you won't be able to see it. So what I'm going to do for right now is I will leave those blank so I can see my numbers again. Okay. So again, you'll just have to play with the y-axes so that you can see the numbers. But again, notice my light intensity, even though it looks like it's fluctuating a lot, it really isn't right now. All right. But what we can do with my light sensor, right, is I can always move it closer to a light source, or I can always shine a light on it. And just remember, it takes a while for the program to update, and we should see on our data here a jump in the light intensity, and there it is, right? All of a sudden my light intensity jumped to 1,827, and as I get my light closer, we should see another jump. Because again, remember, the light intensity is inversely proportional to the distance the light is away. So now I've got my light intensity reading of 2257, right? So if I take it out in the sun, it'll go up even more, and now that I've taken the light down again, you should be able to see the light intensity value go back down again. So again, our Y value is going to change based upon the levels of the data. So if you're anticipating seeing large fluctuations like this, might as well just leave the y-axis at blank, right? But if you're expecting things to stay in a range, then you can change it so you can see the individual data points. Okay. So now you also can do things to make things a little bit easier to be able to view, and that is what we're going to do next. Alright, so I've got my graphs where we're streaming the data, but sometimes it might be easier to allow a user not to look at a graph, but maybe to look like a dashboard or something like that. You know, it kind of depends on who you think is going to be reading at comfort level with interpreting line graphs, and sometimes that can be hard for people. So what we can do here at the top is I've got add visualizations and I've got add widgets. Okay? Now, a couple other things that we have to do. Notice right now I've got my tab in private view. This is my public view. So this is going to be my website up here where I've got ThingSpeak.com channels 1461305, right? And anybody should be able to see that greenhouse with that link. But right now, the default is not to share. And how we do that is I go to sharing, right? And then I can click share this channel view with everyone. That means that anybody who has the URL will be able to see it, or you can just share it with special people. Okay. So now that's going to be set. So now if I go back to my public view, this is what the public sees. Okay. And my private view is only what I see. So I can use my private view to, to test things out to see how it goes. And if I like it, and then I can add that to my public view. So let's play around with my private view here, and so we can see how we can add a few other things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a widget. So I can add a gauge, I can add a numeric display, or I can add an indicator. Okay, let's add a gauge. Okay, so let's click next. So let's say I want my gauge to be temperature. All right, and my temperature, if you remember, is field 1. And I'm going to have it go to 40 to 100, let's say 110. Right? My measurements is in Fahrenheit. I can change my tick intervals and things like that, and how often I want to update my gauge. Now I can also put down here some kind of color indicators. So let's say my range is danger, and maybe I want, if it's over 80, I really want it to be in the red. Okay. Now, let's say if it's, say, 70 to 80, that's going to be in the warning phase, so maybe I want my color to be yellow. And then if it's, say, some 40 to 70, you know, maybe plants are okay. So I'm going to have that in my green phase. Okay. Now again, you can also decide that, hey, you know, 40 is awfully cold for your plant, so you can add another one in if you wanted to. And say if it's, say, some 40 to 50, that should be red too, or some other color, or purple or something like that, or blue, you know, that it's cold, things like that. So, but now I think I've got everything. So now I've got a gauge, right, that says how warm it is and what the temperature is, right, and it points right to it. Now if you notice on my, my public view, that's not there, right? So what I have to do is, if you want something to show up on your public view, you have to add the widget here again, right? So you have to do the same thing. Alright, so I'm going to say 40, max is 100, it was in Fahrenheit, tick intervals, I'm going to say if it's 80 to 100 red, if it's 70 to 80, I'm going to have that to be yellow, and then if it's, say, 50 to 70, or let's say 69.9, something like that, it's going to be green. But then if it happens to, say, be in a range of 40 to 49.99, right, almost up to 50, I'm going to want it to be purple or blue. Let's say blue, because that's going to be cold. Okay, so now I can create this, and now that shows up on my public view. Okay. So now anybody with this URL, which is your channel, which is a channel assigned to your microbit, will be able to easily see the data streaming from your greenhouse. Right, so if you're trying to help somebody figure out what's maybe going wrong with their greenhouse, this could be a great place to start. Okay. All right. So I can add other widgets. You know, I'm going to add a numeric display. This one I'm going to say is light intensity. And it was field 3, and measurement values were in lux. Alright, and I'm just going to leave it as an integer, right? Decimal is if you wanted to have, you know, 27.34, something like that. Here it doesn't really matter. Our light sensor isn't that sensitive. And what I'm going to do is I am going to create that, and that's my light reading. And again, I should be able to just shine a flashlight on my light sensor and be able to see my light readings change in my reading. Alright, there it's starting to head up. And notice it tells you when it was last updated. Alright. So that's kind of how you can make different widgets, right? I can make a lamp indicator, right? If I just say, hey, you know, I need some visual, and it just needs to be red, blue, or green. You know, something is good. I don't care about the number. I just want to know whether it's bad or good, and that could be red, green, and yellow. You can almost treat the lamp indicator as the equivalent LED, right? Strip is how we use the LED strip on our greenhouse. And then all of these other settings up here is where you can go back and edit it, right? Channel settings, right? I can fix my misspelling of retirement, right? You can, again, always add fields later to your channel. You don't have to make a new channel when you add new sensors, okay? And what's also nifty is you can import and export your data, right? And so we can have it go to the right time, and we are on Eastern time here in the Boston area, right? So I can upload or download my data. So let's download the data. So let's find us in Eastern time, USA. There we are. Alright, so now if I click download, it's going to download all my data as a spreadsheet. And it's going to look like this format. Right? But now we can graphic. Alright, so you'll download it as a CSV file, which you can open up into export or into Excel, and we'll play around with that in another video. But that's really all there is to ThingSpeak. It's actually fairly easy. Some of the key things that you have to remember is where your API keys are. Right? To make sure that it's sharing, that it's public, so you can just share a URL. Right? And then usually what I end up doing is I mostly spend my time editing the public mode, because if I do something in here that I don't like and say, you know, I really don't want my lux value anymore, you can just click the X and it goes away. Right? So it's actually fairly straightforward on how you navigate ThingSpeak.